Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the 2016 UIC Urban Forum. My name is Mike Pagano. I'm Medina College of Urban Planning and Public Affairs here at UIC and also the project director of this wonderful event, the UIC Urban Forum. Before we begin, I want to call out a few thanks to the folks who have helped pull this together. Support from the Chicago Community Trust, the MacArthur Foundation, WBEZ, the Institute for Policy and Civic Engagement, and the College of Urban Planning and Public Affairs. I'd also like to recognize the co-chairs who've been very helpful in providing us with ideas and names, including the Chancellor Michael Amarides of UIC, Juan Salgado of the Instituto de Progreso Latino, and Tony Preckwinkle, the President of the Cook County Board. Thanks to the three of them for being our co-chairs this year. We have, I think, a very exciting program with a lot of dynamic speakers who are going to explore various issues around the jobs and the labor force of tomorrow. But before we begin with those, a formal welcoming from the Chancellor of UIC by Michael Amarides is forthcoming. Michael?
Good morning and thank you, Mike. It's a privilege, a pleasure to welcome all of you to the University of Illinois at Chicago and to the 2016 UIC Urban Forum. My understanding for my job today was make sure you warm them up for the real speakers that they're coming up. And also, Dean Pagano said, watch the crowd, because usually from CAPA we come in late, so if they're not here to hear the people who they want to hear, extend it. If they show up, just finish immediately. So that's what I will try to do. Let me join Mike Pagano in thanking the co-chairs this year. I know that Juan Salgado, the president and CEO of the Instituto del Progreso Latino, is sitting right here, and you will hear him in a few minutes. And president of the Cook County Board of Commissioners, Tony Preckwinkle, is unable to join us today. She was there last night when we had a dinner with the speakers, and her support we really deeply value and appreciate. And it's very good always to remember the sponsors and to mention again the MacArthur Foundation, the Chicago Community Trust, WBEZ, and the organizers internally, the college and the Institute for Policy and Public Engagement. You will also hear from two outstanding keynote speakers today, Clarence Page, senior member of the Chicago Tribune editorial board and a keen observer of national and city politics for decades. And I would add, after having dinner with Clarence last night, I'm impressed by how much this man knows his music, which is really something that you don't expect. And Terry Mazzani, president and CEO of the Chicago Community Trust. Terry is with his finance committee of his board this morning, but he will join us later today. And Terry is a proud alumnus of the University of Illinois at Chicago. I would also like to thank all of the exceptional guests participating in the various panels, and we have dynamite panels today throughout the conference. The University of Illinois at Chicago is proud to continue our long-time commitment to a national discussion of the vital issues facing urban areas and to host this impressive group of speakers and participants that they are ready to offer their insight and unique perspectives. This university has in fact been hosting an annual conference devoted to urban issues for 22 years. It hasn't taken this exact form. It's only the last 5 years, I believe, that this forum has been held. But we have been at the forefront with an annual conference on urban issues for 22 years. And this should not come as a surprise to anyone, because we are located in the heart of one of the world's greatest cities, and all the issues are in our doorstep. Those of you who are from USC have heard me saying repeatedly that we are where the people are, we are located where the problems are, they are in our doorstep, and we are located exactly where the opportunities are. So we shouldn't be surprised that we are dealing with these issues. Cities like Chicago are the stages for the lives and the experiences of more than half of the world's population today. And it is in cities like Chicago where the critical issues affecting the population of the world are felt first. Global population by now has become very interconnected in ways that they didn't exist even 20 years ago. And as a result, when a problem hits one of these pockets, urban pockets, regardless of what the problem is, it may be a healthcare issue, it may be a security issue, it may be an economic development issue, it may be jobs, the environment. The effects are very quickly felt around the world in all other similar pockets of urban population. And to be sure, in addition of the interconnectivity, the problems that we are referring to, health, security, economic development, jobs, the environment, they are also more interconnected and interdependent today at the core than ever were before. That's where our university, that's where the University of Illinois at Chicago, which is one of the leading urban-serving public research universities in the nation, and every word in this definition has a meaning. Public-serving, urban-serving research university in the nation. That's where institutions like UIC really come into play. Today's discussion on jobs and the labor workforce of tomorrow is particularly important and timely, especially in an election season where jobs is everything that you hear. The three focus areas of the forum, migration, training and education, are fundamental to the work that this university does every day. The quality of urban life and the viability of urban regions depend upon the capacity of metropolitan areas to meet the workforce needs. What we've seen over the past several decades has been a shift away from the manufacturing in what we call the developed world nations to the developing nations. This has left the developed world with a significant gap between high-paying jobs in the area that we call the knowledge economy, primarily bio and technology, and much lower-paying service sector jobs. And this gap has actually magnified disparities in education, in healthcare, in access to several aspects of public life, and the quality of life in general. Defining the needs of tomorrow's workforce has, of course, invited plenty of political discussions, but not solutions, not enough solutions. The fact remains that the public has a right to demand and expect an economy and political system that provides a basic living standard for all, and that includes jobs. We need to remember that as the forces of urbanization and globalization keep reshaping our world, it's critically important that all people also have access to higher education. It is also critically important that higher education, public higher education in particular, is prepared to meet the needs of our society and the changes of the employment picture. After all, our job, and again, those of you from UIC have heard me repeatedly saying this, our job is to educate citizens, but also it is to prepare competent professionals for the workforce. For cities like Chicago, to ensure the health, safety and well-being of their citizens, it is vital that public higher education continues to thrive. And it is also important to have the support that we need to carry on the scholarly work that we do, building the intellectual infrastructure to deal with the critical societal issues, exactly what we are doing today, where we are discussing jobs and the labor force of tomorrow. I'm not going to bring the financial support, but you figured out what I have been talking about. We have an important role to play in securing the future success of our urban regions by leading these discussions and by helping in determining and shaping the solutions. Public research universities like UIC serve as a catalyst for stimulating debate about the challenges and opportunities facing our cities. Today, you are part of this debate, and I want to thank you all for your contributions and your participation. Welcome to UIC one more time.
Well, we have an interesting theme today, don't we? The unemployment rate is now at 4.9%. Poverty rate in Chicago has now dropped to 13.3%. The U.S. is 14.7%. Unemployment is lowest since December of 2007. Income rose 2.4% in Chicago this last year. In the U.S., it rose by 3.8%. And so the theme that we're talking about is jobs seems to be out of touch. And yet the Great Cities Institute just released a report a few months ago that documented that 47% of black males in the city of Chicago between the ages of 20 and 24 are not in school or working. In other words, the averages mask a lot of variation, not just in Chicago, but around the country. The timing of this event on jobs and the labor force of tomorrow couldn't be better. We have a contemporary policy conversation on community colleges, on free trade zones, will people move in response to market signals, on barring or easing immigration and what the effects would be on wages, on workforce development. Are we properly and appropriately training the workforce for tomorrow? The first panel is called Evolving Pathways to Work. And the panelists are going to be picking up the themes that make this an important conversation today about jobs and the labor force of tomorrow. I want to welcome to the stage the moderator for the first panel today, John McCarran, the former editorial board member of the Chicago Tribune. Seated next to him will be Teresa Mintle, President and CEO of the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce and the former Chief of Staff for 2 mayors. Next to her is Juan Salgado, the President and CEO of the Instituto del Progreso Latino and a 2015 MacArthur Fellow. And next to him, Dr. James Heckman, a professor of economics at the University of Chicago and a Nobel Prize economist in 2000. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome.
Mike, you told me I was going to get to do the introductions, so I'm going to do them anyway. And let me begin by thanking Chancellor Amaritis for getting us off to a fast and I think inspiring start. That was just a beautiful summation. My name is John McCarran. I am a recovering financial editor and editorial writer from the Chicago Tribune, which still runs my op-eds from time to time. More recently, I've freelanced for various nonprofits, notably Local Initiative Support Corporation. I think we have some alums here from LISC, where I've written extensively about community development issues, from affordable housing to economic development, including a few articles about workforce training. LISC supports outfits like Jane Addams Resource Center and Instituto, which we'll get to momentarily, but done a little field reporting in those areas. Mind you, I'm no expert, though, on the subject of job readiness, but I do know it's one of the most complex and critical issues facing our nation, our state, and our metropolitan region. It's also a subject loaded with big data, lots of numbers, lots of jargon, a veritable alphabet soup of acronym agencies, programs from JTPA to CCWP. Anybody? CCWP, Cook County Workforce Partnership. So it's easy to get lost in this thicket of numbers and programs. Still, I thought that this morning, before I introduce our real experts seated beside me, I'll throw out 3 mini factoids just to get us thinking. Factoid number 1, 30% of all African Americans in Cook County between the ages of 16 and 24 were both out of school and out of work during 2014. 30%. Mike's number is higher because he took the higher age cohort of that group, but that's a report, as Mike said, prepared earlier this year by U of C's Great Cities Institute for the Cook County Board. The title of the report is A Lost Generation: The Disappearance of Teens and Young Adults from the Job Market in Cook County. Lost Generation. Factoid number 2, at the same time, the number of open manufacturing jobs in the United States has been rising steadily. since 2009. A little counterintuitive when we talk about deindustrialization. With help-wanted positions are now at their highest levels in 15 years, with over 350,000 postings nationally per month for manufacturing jobs. However, manufacturers say they're having trouble finding workers with the skill sets needed to operate the latest machinery or even to function effectively in a highly flexible and collaborative workplace. Not enough math skills to, say, read a blueprint, not enough soft skills to communicate well with their supervisors or even to get along with their coworkers. Factoid number 3. While it's still true that college students earn more than high school graduates, roughly about $17,500 more a year, it's also true that college student loan debt has tripled over the last decade and adds up now to about $1.2 trillion, with the average bachelor's graduate owing about $35,000. That's from Brad Harrington's white paper. Okay, who read all the white papers for today's? No, we won't do that. So, even though it takes only 2 years to make up that $35,000 loan, one wonders how long the college degree advantage will continue. Now that even professional functions such as the reading of x-rays or the drafting of legal documents are being outsourced to South Asia and beyond, and now that enterprise software is replacing so many middle management functions. So we've got a lot to talk about this morning, and we are fortunate on this first panel to have exactly the right people to talk the talk. Each of our panelists will open with a brief overview of the situation from their perspective. Brief as in 5 to 7 minutes. I have this cough, so I may be coughing if as you reach the 7-minute mark. Whereupon we'll talk a bit among ourselves up here, but we'll be sure to save at least 10 minutes at the end of the discussion to take questions from the floor. First, let me then introduce all 3 panelists in the order that they'll be speaking. Leading off will be Teresa Mintle, who for 3 years has been president and CEO of the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce. Teresa has spent 27 years working at the national, state, and local levels of government, especially working on programs to grow jobs and the economy. Most recently, she spent 2 of those years as chief of staff to Mayor Rahm Emanuel. And before that, she was chief of staff to the board of the Chicago Transit Authority. Teresa is a graduate of the University of Illinois at Champaign, holds an MPA from the University of Wisconsin. She also admits to being a devotee of cooking, yoga, Thomas Jefferson, and most importantly, the Chicago White Sox. Doubtless why she wore her black and white. Yes.
My uniform.
We're the team that's going to clinch the division today, aren't we? I haven't been following it that closely this year. Our man in the middle this morning is Juan Salgato, who since 2001 has been president and CEO of the Instituto de Progreso Latino. Under his leadership, Instituto has achieved historic growth and award-winning recognition, establishing best practice educational and workforce models aimed at increasing the economic mobility and well-being of Chicago families. In recognition of those achievements, Juan was named to last year's class of the MacArthur Fellows, or as we always called them in the newsroom, the Genius Grants. I wonder how many people have asked him for a loan or grant since then, but none. Nobody says. At Instituto, Juan works with Latino immigrants on Chicago's southwest side, many of whom face formidable barriers to upward mobility, often without high school diplomas or the English language skills needed for a GED or even for a vocational training program. Juan has pioneered the use of contextualized learning to equip workers in skills leading to higher paying jobs in manufacturing and healthcare, two of the sectors where there's a growing demand for a diverse, multilingual workforce. Juan has earned an associate's degree from Moraine Valley Community College, which I was really impressed by because if somebody in the room is going to be able to speak to community colleges from direct experience. He earned a BA from Illinois Wesleyan University and an MUP, Master's in Urban Planning. That's good. There we go. Okay, from the University of Illinois at Champaign. Finally, this morning we'll hear from James Heckman, who is the Henry Schultz Distinguished Service Professor of Economics at the University of Chicago. Jim is the founding director there of the Center for the Economics of Human Development, where he guides research on skill development, inequality, and social mobility. In 2000, Professor Heckman won the Nobel Prize in Economics for his work on the microeconometrics of diversity and heterogeneity, and for developing a causal basis for public policy evaluation. Jim has a BA in mathematics from Colorado College, an MA and a PhD in economics from Princeton University. A fixture at the U of C since 1973, Jim was one of the founders of the Harris School of Public Policy. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences and other societies and honorary organizations too numerous to mention. He also has received numerous honorary degrees, most recently from University College London. He's co-editor of the Journal of Political Economy. He has published more than 300 articles in 9 books, most recently one titled The Myth of Achievement Tests, the GED and the Role of Character in American Life. We'll get to that subject later, I hope, Jim. But first, let us hear from the Chicagoland Chamber's Teresa Mint.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Dean Pagano and Chancellor Amoritis, for allowing me to be part of this forum today and on this panel. And I'm glad, John, that you and the paper coming out of the school talked about the lost generation. Because at the Chamber, we hear about that all the time. And in fact, I, having come from public service and now working for the Chamber, have been able to experience it on both sides. When we talk about the generation that is lost, we have to look back and understand what we've done to education over the last generation. And when I say what we've done to it, it's not necessarily pejorative or negative, but that some decisions that were made have had now lasting implications, and they're really hitting us hard at a very critical time in our economic growth. About 20 years ago or so, we sort of all woke up and decided everyone should get a college degree. Everyone should get a college degree. No offense, gentlemen, but it's not for everyone. I'm a college graduate in my family. My youngest brother is not. My second youngest brother is not. That doesn't mean that we each took a wrong path or a better path, but their skill set and my skill set were very different, and we went in a different direction. But there was a time when we made this decision to really emphasize college attainment and didn't really recognize the diversity of what our skill sets are and what our interests are, much less what the economy was doing. And if you think about what's happened to our economy in the last 20 years, it has changed more dramatically in the last 20 years, even the last 7 years, than it did during the entire first half of the last century. So what we had happen was this focus on getting everyone into college. That meant that we kind of said, we don't need vocational education in high school anymore. We're just going to give everybody all that math, that science, that history, that English that they need so that they can get into the best college at their attainment level. A great goal, but again, not everybody was well suited for that. At the same time, in Chicago anyway, we had a community college system that wasn't really focused on training for the jobs in the marketplace. It was really just sort of a landing spot for people that may not have gotten into that college they wanted, or they still weren't sure what they wanted to do, but they weren't getting a lot of direction. And then about 10 years ago, the business community said, things are changing really fast, and we don't have a workforce that's keeping up with it. And it became a real aha moment. And we began to realize that by not giving kids the opportunity to learn what was happening in manufacturing by upskilling and being much more digital and technology oriented, that they weren't able to get those jobs. And even some of the kids coming out of school who did have a penchant for STEM learning, that's science, technology, engineering, and math, they weren't getting it in the kind of level at the high school that they should have in order to be really successful at UIC or UIUC. So about 8 years ago, and it really does go back this far already, Mayor Daley said, okay, we've got to do some big changes here. I've got to start revisiting what I did to public schools about 25 years ago and start thinking about bringing back vocational ed. But it's not just the vocational side, because we've got incredibly talented kids in the Chicago public school system. I need to give them international baccalaureate. I need to give them STEM learning. I need to give them hospitality learning. And he really doubled down on opening up options and opportunities in the CPS system. But he also recognized that that wasn't enough. And this is really where the business community played a significant role. The business community said, look, we think what goes on at UIC, UIUC, the Big Ten is fantastic, and we recruit from there, and that is never going to change. But boy, we need some help finding those welders, finding those kids that can actually know what's going on in technology and apply it on a work floor, on a manufacturing floor. And so working with businesses, whether it was transportation, distribution, and logistics, hospitality, manufacturing, business services, healthcare, he basically doubled down on city colleges and started to redirect the focus so that each college campus in the system became an expert in that particular industry. He then announced that he was retiring, and Mayor Emanuel won. And Mayor Emanuel, and I was there at the time with him, I was his first chief of staff for his first 2 years in office, took it to an entirely new level with investment in the system, with really reaching out to the business community and saying, it's not enough that you're telling us you need this. You should be drafting the curriculum. You need to be investing in what we're doing. You need to give me a workforce, a workshop floor that my kids can learn from. And boy, did the Chicago business community rally and really begin to support that. I also will mention that the STEM learning that we're doing here in Chicago is pretty groundbreaking, and it's actually been modeled elsewhere in the country. We have 5 STEM learning schools, each of which is sponsored by a corporation here in Chicago. Microsoft, Motorola, IBM, Cisco, and Verizon are the 5 companies that sponsor that. But they're not just making sure that the kids have a good curriculum while they're in high school, and this is where the Chamber of Commerce specifically comes in. We're actually giving those kids a summer internship opportunity so that they can get real-world experience. And they're going into our small business members. They're not just in an office with a bunch of other people at a big corporation. They're literally designing web pages. They're helping people with their spreadsheets and their business models. They are really on the ground, and these kids are doing unbelievable work over the summer. They are getting great experience, and they're also helping small businesses that might not be able to afford that service to actually get it. So that's a quick overview of what we see, how this has evolved, and where we are playing a role right now. And I look forward to talking more about it as we get into the conversation.
Excellent. Great start. Juan Salgado, what does it look like on the street in Little Village? What does it look like at Instituto?
I think the thing I would like to share is that we've actually been leaders in the evolution, right? And community entities like mine are often leaders in the evolution because we're right where it happens, right? We're right at the place where the rubber hits the road, where people are feeling the pain, or seeing the potential opportunity, right? And so if you think about our organization has been around for 40 years, an organization that really has its core asset as adult educators, and an organization that believes that education is the power and freedom to live and enjoy the best that this country has to offer, the power to provide for our families and ensure a better quality of life, and believes that for every learner, right? We run an elementary school, 400 students, except they're all adults. Kindergarten to 8th grade. And yesterday, Jorge Macias, who runs the Office of Language and Culture for CPS, told me a quick story. He says, my dad went through your program when he was in the 2nd grade, and he graduated with his GED, right? And now Jorge runs the Office of Language and Culture. And so you believe in every learner, you believe in the parents being learners, that translates to the kids, right? And so we really believe in that. And so what I'd like to share is about 16 years ago, I arrived at Instituto, and one of the things we accelerated was our work with local employers. And as Teresa was saying, there wasn't a lot of attention to this at the time, right? If you went to a local manufacturer, they were still, even though we were losing a lot of manufacturing jobs, the change was already happening to a more skilled workforce. And the public school system wasn't paying much attention to it. And we did. We said, well, and why did we? Because we just asked people, where do you work? What do you want? Better job. Right? People that are coming to learn English. And they say, where do you work? And they say, here's where we work. So let's go, right, and visit your employer. And we visit the employer and we say, hey, we want to help them and help you. And that was a really easy conversation. It was like, oh, yeah, that's great. I love that worker. And I love the fact that they're already studying. And how can we do this? And so we started to do, bridges in manufacturing, contextualized learning, right, to the actual career path that these folks were already on. And we're having great success. By the way, over the last 10, 15 years, we've ended up placing over 4,000 people in manufacturing. Okay, when the Ford Supplier Park opened in South Chicago, they had 600 openings for Chicagoans. We were one of 4 contractors to do that work. 450 of those placements came from us. Okay, and so there's a way to be really good at this, and I'm so pleased when Mayor Daley decided to make this turn, and so pleased when Rahm Emanuel picked up on it, right? Because this really matters. This is income that could be in the hands of working families that's not in the hands of working families. And you have some families that are working too many jobs, right? And other people that are doing too much overtime, right? And that has to come together as well. So we got really good at it. We just didn't do it in manufacturing. We started doing healthcare too. I'll just say we started in healthcare and got to the point we got really good at this, right? We got really good at what? We got really good at taking a 6th grade reader, right, and turning them into a successful college student and turning them to someone who can get a license, right, at a 92, pass the licensure exam at 92%, right? Okay, at the time, City College's rate was about 40%. So we're taking 6th grade readers and turning them into incredible, successful college students. Well, wait a minute. Think about what that means. Normally, in our development education system, development ed, I'm not talking about adult ed, I'm talking about developmental ed, very few people that have multiple development ed courses required end up getting any credential of economic value whatsoever. We were getting 90%. What it proves is that people that, and I'm not just talking about immigrants, by the way, the people we're serving also include the generations of young people that never graduated, years and years of people dropping out of high school, and years of people not completing high school, but not having the learning that they need to pass an exam at the 10th grade level, right? And so that's the population of adults that are in our community. There are 36 million folks in the United States of America that don't read or compute at the 10th grade level, right? We absolutely need every one of those 36 million, right? And it's organizations like ours that believe that it's possible for those individuals in our communities to actually get there if our public systems align to that, right? And so the last thing I'll share in terms of being leaders in the evolving pathway is that even before Mayor Daley decided to make the switch, we were already planning a high school, a charter school devoted to health sciences, right? We were already working with the healthcare community, and what we found was we had one pathway in nursing, and they kept talking about this pathway and that pathway and that, and it was like, well, we can't meet your needs with adults in this way. Why don't we do a school? And so we started to plan a school. And I'll just say that it was the last school that Arne Duncan actually approved before he went to the U.S. Department of Ed, right? And it was in many ways the first school that was really along the STEM path, that Mayor Emanuel has really accelerated, right? In fact, 3 months after getting elected, he came to our opening of our new building, and he was greeted by about 6 CEOs and the head of Baxter International to say, yeah, we've been part of the planning of the school. Yeah, we're going to support internships in this school. Yeah, we believe that, we need these career paths, right? And so I want to share with you what it looks like at our school. Small scale, 750 students, but it's an example of what's possible. Over 50% of our kids will gain a dual credit before they graduated. They did last year, they will this upcoming year. Language arts, biology, math, English, and a partnership with Malcolm X College, okay? There's about 38 of our graduates right now, seniors, they will get a certified nurse's assistant certificate, a license, in order to get out into the workforce immediately after graduation. They'll get that before they graduate. And by the way, it's a health science school, but we got kids with lots of interest in lots of other things, right? So roughly about 10 of them will get a credential in CNC, okay? Because they're interested in manufacturing. And we host the Society of Professional Hispanic Engineers, who has us as a junior chapter. We host the Illinois Hispanic Nurses Association, which has us as a junior chapter. We're connecting the professionals of today with the professionals of tomorrow. We're putting them into environments that matter to them, including, by the way, this year's graduating class will have 24 students that went on medical missions all across the world, to India, to Central America, to some of the most, what people would consider the most dangerous, poorest communities in the world, and they have been inspired. And so I'll leave it at that. This is the work we need to do with our youth to actually turn around, and it doesn't just go with our youth. We have to do it with the entire family. Families matter in Chicago.
Thank you, Juan. It's inspiring. I hope there's some level of skepticism that's bubbling up out there, because listening to Teresa and Juan, I mean, we know how to do this. I mean, we know we've got some things that work. But we turn now to Professor Heckman, maybe to find out what's going on the global scale and why these things haven't been scaled up, what the difficulties are. Jim Heckman.
Okay, well, I think my role here is slightly different in the sense that I'm supposed to provide a broader frame, maybe an academic. I think I was introduced as the academic element here on the panel, so I'll try to be academic. And let me make a few statements that I think have actually have underpinned the previous remarks. But I think it's important to really understand just how much the perception has been changed about the importance of skills. We know the modern economy is based on skills, and that's true anywhere around the world. You can go to China, you can go to the foreign direct investment companies working on the Yellow River and seeing exactly the same kind of force towards upskilling the economy. But I think what we've actually come to understand much better, and I think policy really has to take this into account, is you have a much better and broader understanding of how to build skills. And I think this has been missed, and I think it's still missing in some of the public discussions. And here I think we need to think about both a short-run strategy and a long-run strategy. I think the short-run strategy we've heard something about. We have an immediate set of problems. We'd like to address them. We have an existing workforce. We have an existing group of people, many of whom weren't trained. And the question is how we can train them, integrate them, bring them into the economy. But there's also the long-run strategy, which is how do we get children 20 years from now and 30 years from now so that Chicago will be not just productive today and sort of solve or put a patch on our problem, but think about what the long-run factors are. And so let me just throw out a conversation. You sparked this, John, so I'll just, about this book that I had on character in the U.S. economy. But I think when we come to understand what the skills are, we have a much broader inventory than we did maybe even 5-10 years ago. I think that we've always had these, but we somehow educated ourselves out of common sense knowledge. We know that what you call soft skills, people have called soft skills, much broader notion about what soft skills are. They involve a number of traits, which involve self-control, they involve perseverance, conscientiousness, but they also involve the ability to get along with others, to engage others. So it's a very broad range of skills. And it used to be thought that these skills were soft, right? Why were they soft? Because partly you couldn't measure them. The be-all and end-all was an achievement test like the SAT or maybe Iowa standard test. But what we've come to understand is that these soft skills have been measured. For example, even the OECD, which has now been famous for putting out the PISA tests, has in the last few years been openly advocating the development and measurement of inventories to measure these soft skills. So we have measures of these soft skills, and we know these soft skills are important. And we also know that these soft skills are skills, namely things that can be acquired, that can be trained. But now let me talk about one other dimension, which is exactly how skills are produced. And I think the traditional focus has been so much on education. I realize that we're here at a leading university, and it's natural to think about skills in education. But the society produces skills much more broadly. It's not just a question of what's going on in the classroom. A lot of what's going on in the home and how the home integrates with the classroom. And I think that's the modern understanding. So I think that's another important element to throw out here, and to understand that schooling is much broader. So, for example, like 150 years ago, how did Abraham Lincoln get his law degree? He didn't go to any law school at the University of Illinois or any such place. He was an apprentice. What he did is he learned on the job. He learned from individuals. That has been a traditional way of learning skills, and it's a way that I think we're coming back to, really understanding the value of apprenticeship. But then this takes me to what should be my final point, I guess. You want to have a conversation, not oration, so I'll try to restrain myself here. But I think one thing that we really want to think about is how do these skills get produced? And I think we have a deeper understanding of when skill development begins. And this takes us to a life cycle approach, where we understand the importance of the early years, and we understand how important it is for children to be ready to go to school, even at age 5 and 6. What's a frightening statistic that many people still, I don't think, are fully aware of, is that the gaps in college readiness that are there at age 18 are there at age 5, before kids enter school. And so the early family life and the neighborhood and community life plays a very important role. And I think in terms of thinking about skills, now we're talking about long-run skills, but, and thinking about making an education system better and more productive, we really want to think more about improving, supplementing, helping family life. And one of the ugly things that nobody wants to talk about, so we go from pathways to jobs suddenly to families, but the fact of the matter is that family life in some parts of society is really in trouble. And the question is not to take a paternalistic viewpoint and say, oh, these are bad people or good people. Judgments are not needed. I think what's needed is supplementing, helping, and providing opportunities for children across the spectrum. And I think we've come to understand that it's possible. There are effective programs that do that. And there are ones that sort of offer opportunities to families and not talking down to families. So I think that we should think about it. And finally, I would just conclude, if we think what's a successful program and what's not a successful program, I think we should also think very hard about the process of evaluating these programs, doing the hard work of sort of benefit cost analysis, looking at these programs, not just sort of short-run randomized trials, those are important, but also adding to the knowledge base to understand what are the long-term effects of these programs and how we can come up with public policy that's actually very, very effective. And I said it was my last point. This will be my last point. When we think about skills, we also want to think about giving incentives to organizations to hire people with those skills. I think incentives are a very important part that somehow get ignored in the larger discussion. So it's not just a question of giving people skills, although that's very important. I think but we also want to give organizations, businesses, other private factors besides just ordinary manufacturing concerns, the incentives, and this would be tax incentives, incentives more broadly, and infrastructure incentives to produce in Chicago and to have a demand for those skills. So that's my statement.
And I'm glad thank you very much. And I'm glad you ended on incentives, because there's a supply and demand feature. But first of all, I want to announce, if anyone considered they've suffered a microaggression by the professor suggesting that the families don't always give people the soft skills they need, he'll be available over in the corner.
families in school. So it's not just that.
Back to incentives. I think in the green room the other day, Juan mentioned that it's not just providing the supply of capable entry workers. Where's the demand, and we have to work on that. I think you were hitting on that. But doesn't in a globalizing situation, the MBAs who are deciding where to make stuff, every day, it seems to me, or every time they have to decide about their next product line, have to decide whether to scale up here or to outsource to somewhere cheaper. And I'm just wondering, how does the government, for instance, influence that decision of whether to add productive capacity here or take it offshore?
Well, I think we would all speak to this, but you were looking at me, so I'll answer first. And that is, I think it's a question of really providing, as I was saying, the right incentives. So I think if you have too high a level of taxation, too high a level of regulation that discourages job creation, people will look elsewhere. We see that. We see businesses moving to Florida. We're talking about staying in the United States. But also, you're looking, for example, at cheap wages. Ford Motor yesterday noticed that they were putting all their small-scale production now offshore, namely producing in Mexico. And that's simply an economic decision. I don't think that Ford Motor is unpatriotic. I think literally they're trying to make money. And so I think there really is a global economy. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. And the reason why I say that is, in the 1950s, when the U.S., ended as the kind of the world's monopolist after the Second World War. Europe was destroyed. A lot of Asia was destroyed. We had a monopoly position. We could do things socially that I don't think we can do. And people are going back to kind of the notion of the romantic era of the 1950s, and we can't do that anymore. We have to respect that in the global economy, incentives are there. People can leave, and businessmen are in it for the money, and they're in it to make, and like it or not. So Trump may say we're going to build walls and keep industry in and so forth, but that's simply not going to help the American economy.
30% tariffs on
30% tariffs, right? So I guess Ford Motor is about to get a 30% tariff in its new plants in Mexico. But the point is that's I don't think a realistic strategy. I think we have to recognize we give people skills, but we can be competitive. The United States can be competitive. It's just a question of giving entrepreneurs and businesses, I think, opportunities. But not over-regulating is what I think is important.
Dean Pagano warned me, he said, don't get mental going on taxes and regulation. However, since she's sitting so close to me, what about that trade-off that's made, I'm sure, every day between production here and production offshore?
You were right to warn him, Dean Pagano, and I'll watch the clock. There's also, incentives are important, but in Chicago we've had very recent experience with disincentives, and it's specifically with the Chicago-only minimum wage and the Chicago-only paid sick leave. I am not against an increase in people being paid a fair wage for what they do, and I think from a woman's perspective, having time off because we really are the caregivers of the world is critically important. But when you look at the global environment in the larger picture, you immediately start to see how doing something good can have very adverse impacts. And we are a living laboratory in Chicago right now. Since the minimum wage increase went into effect, we've seen a drop-off in people's hours and the number of people that are being hired for the lowest skilled jobs. And I'm not just talking about Target, Walmart, and McDonald's, by no means. I am talking about people who are desperately trying to get their business off the ground and want to be here in Chicago. They want to grow their business in Chicago, and they are not hiring that fourth, fifth, or sixth person. Or worse, they're making the decision to, look across the border to Indiana or Wisconsin because the same regulations aren't there. And what we said as the chamber when this discussion started in Chicago, and by the way, I was on Mayor Emanuel's task force for this, we said, first of all, if this is right, then it should be done at the very least statewide, if not federally, an increase in the minimum wage. But more importantly, if we're going to do this only in Chicago, we can't add a whole bunch of other obligations, requirements onto the business community. Think about what's happened if you're a small business person. And mind you, the big guys, they can figure this out because they've got a global marketplace to work in. If you're a small business in Chicago, in the last year and a half, You have had your property taxes go up. You're now going to have your water and sewer fee go up. If you're in retail, you are now required to have plastic bags. If you provide an hourly wage to people, you now have to pay a higher hourly wage. You now have to provide paid sick leave. That'll kick in later this year. And in addition to that, you're responding to that marketplace. Your commodity prices are going up. Good old ComEd might have also increased your utility rates. The death by 1,000 cuts is actually causing us to stop creating jobs in Chicago. What we support is absolutely doubling down on STEM learning, International Baccalaureate, bringing vocational education back to CPS, and by all means continuing what's going on at the city colleges, because upskilling is so much better than just keeping you at a low-skill job and giving you an extra 50 cents a year. I'll stop now, Dean Pagano.
I might, chime in a little. I mean, I think, at the ground floor, what you realize too is that families are making so little. We're out of balance, right? Families are making so little that they actually have to work 2 and 3 jobs sometimes, right? And so, I don't necessarily see, the fewer people hired as a bad thing in some senses, because those people that have been working 2 and 3 jobs in order to make ends meet. And so the thing I think is really important is that any time as a society we get out of balance, and we've been out of balance, right? As a society we've been. When you have so many communities that are left out of the economy, when you have so many families that have to live, family of 4. At my institution, the average amount of money a family of 4 has is $19,000 a year. That's what they have to live on, right? Now, try living on $19,000 a year for a family of 4 in Chicago, right? The cost of being poor is really high. And so you'll end up in a tough neighborhood and a very tough circumstances. And so I think that we have to have pressure right now. You talked about the Walmarts of the world, right? The McDonald's. They are now putting more of their capital in the hands of working families, right? And that's a good thing, because people now have more disposable income in the world, right? I agree. We can't get to a point where we're driving business out, because that's counterproductive, right? That gets us to a point where there really are negative impacts. And so we need to be very thoughtful about this, right? But we also need to understand that we have been out of balance. We continue to be out of balance. And as long as we are out of balance, right, we are going to need significant amounts of pressure to get in balance. And there are a lot of jobs in this city that you can't move, right? Where we ought to be thoughtful about why we're paying what we're paying. I mean, think about a domestic worker, right? These are the people caring for our elderly. These are the folks caring for our children, right? If we really truly value our parents and we truly value our children, those caregivers would be paid much more than they are paid right now. And so I don't just believe that pressure ought to come from the fight for a higher minimum wage, but it ought to come from consciousness building among the paying public, right? We may need to pay a little more, right, in order to get more, right, as a society. And so we need to have thoughtful conversations and some level of equilibrium. I just suggest we've been a lot out of equilibrium.
Nice job. Poor guy is between a U of C economist and the Chamber of Commerce.
Wait, though. I think that there are ways and there are ways. I think it's very important. So we can say, yes, there may be a poverty problem. And I think there is. And there really is a sense in which we might want to put more resources in the pocket. But there are better ways and there are worse ways. There are ways that kind of are incentive producing. So I'll give you an example. I mean, people talk about the EITC, but they talk more generally about job subsidies. Part of the problem, and I think it's real in the sense that we find that when you impose things like minimum wage, one of the white papers is kind of taking a standard ILO line and saying, the minimum wages are costless, and when I go back to a different era, they're not costless. They take their form in various ways. Even if they don't reduce jobs, and they do frequently, as you just noted, they also increase prices. I mean, so one way or another, the cost has to be borne. It can be in the form of consumers. And some recent studies have suggested that it's poor and disadvantaged people who are actually bearing the cost of some of those minimum wage increases induced. So I think we want to think more broadly and think about ways not to distort but actually to try to promote kind of sort of make win-win situations. So if you can imagine, there is a real function here to transfer resources to poor, but can we do it in a more effective way? So I'm just thinking an efficient kind of redistribution rather than kind of an antagonistic one of saying, let's tax these capitalist, bastards or whatever the terminology might be, and give money to them. I think we really want to think of less of a zero sum, and there are better ways. I think there really is a way. So I completely agree. $19,000 a year is pretty limited to live on any place in Chicago, any neighborhood. And so I'm not denying anything that you're saying. But I think we might do a better way, right? And
I agree that there are ways and there are ways. The challenge is that when you're out of equilibrium, unless there's pressure and push, right, that comes from the public in significant ways, there's not the will. We could change EITC and increase it phenomenally,
right,
tomorrow. Except there has to be political will to make that happen on a national basis, right? To really turn it into something much greater than it is right now. And so all I'm saying is that when you are at significant equilibrium, a society cannot continue. This equilibrium, a society cannot continue. There will be pressure. There are some short-term benefits and some short-term consequences to it, but getting everybody focused on the issue is the long-term win.
But think about it this way. There are multiple margins. There are multiple margins. And so let's take the example of trying to reduce poverty. One of the big issues that we haven't discussed is childcare. It's an issue. Now both candidates are talking about it. I think it's a real issue. What's found now, if you subsidize childcare, quality childcare, you can have multiple benefits, not only in making it easier for women to work, okay, but you also can see benefits in the children and putting them in a high-quality environment. So I would just say it's not just, so minimum wage is one. But I would actually think you'd want to think more broadly about kind of how we might help families and how we might help institutions, right?
And I'm so glad that those issues are rising in importance. That's what we need to do.
Juan, you win the Nobel, you get the last word. So, although I'm a local Yoko, regional person, it worries. So I feel for our friend from Gargoyle Land because, what if DuPage County doesn't raise its water rates, and what if Iowa doesn't raise its, it's the idea of raising standards by jurisdiction. Let's go to the floor. We got a lot of really smart people out there, several of whom I think I recognize and know. Somebody's got to have a little pushback here or a comment, and if not, we'll go on. I mean, we could get these three going.
John, there's one.
Run out the thing. Second row there, yeah.
Hi, I'm Mary Beth Welch with Youth Connection Charter School, and so I'm looking particularly at the youth in age 16 to 24 and what is the employment situation and how we can encourage having youth have any experience at all in working. And I see more and more of these opportunities to come out for organizations to be able to help youth train for, get ready for, develop skills for jobs, and then need to have a job unsubsidized for a year. So I'm wondering if there's any thoughts about how those jobs could actually be created, since that makes for an impossible situation as far as I can see in getting positions that are unsubsidized for youth.
Yeah, entry-level jobs, internships. Internships have been very successful. A lot of the charter schools have used them, and the Catholic schools.
I'll go ahead and take a quick stab at this.
Please do, Teresa.
There's a lot of answers to your question, actually. And I think one of the themes you've heard up here is making sure that we're training people for the jobs that are there. And so that's first and foremost. And it's not just enough to have soft skills and basic math and English, but there's a lot of competition out there because there's a lot of people looking for jobs, not only at the high school level, but at the post-high school level. And because the jobs are so upskilled, every little advantage makes a big difference. So I think that for any of you who are doing workforce development and training, make sure you take time to talk to the people who are on your boards or who you've successfully worked with in the past to ensure that you're really preparing people for the jobs that are there. But then second of all, I think it's critically important, the upskilling is critically important because you'll find entry-level jobs in a lot of places. A lot of my members have summer jobs or entry-level jobs, and they're a cycle. They 3 months, 6 months if you're lucky, and it's just sort of going through the ringer. What we try to do, working with CPS and the STEM school students, is to make sure that we match what they're doing. So if they are a good tech person that can do web pages, we don't just send them to any one of our small business clients. We make sure it's one of our clients that needs their web page refreshed. And it's not easy. It takes a lot of time and energy. But again, we don't just kind of do this because we know we've got a dozen students coming in for 8 weeks in the summer. We really prepare all year with our small business clients to make sure we know what their needs are, and we also work with Sarah Good Academy, which is the school we get our students from, to make sure that they can actually fit into the mold that we're looking for. And it's very labor intensive. I realize that, and I know that a lot of us don't have resources, but I'll tell you, we had 2 young gentlemen last year. It was the first year that STEMs were available, STEM internships. They were rising seniors. They were from the South Side, came out of Sarah Good. They were with us. They worked with our clients. And at the end of their internship, I took them out for lunch, and I said, okay, this was the first time we did this. What would you change? What could have made this experience better? And 2 17-year-olds told me they wish they could have worked more. Mm-hmm. And it was because of all the upfront work we did to make sure the match was that good. And they actually came back and did a second internship now that they're going off to college. And so it was really quite exciting.
Excellent point. Who do we have on the aisle, but halfway toward the end? Yeah, with a blue shirt. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Where's the microphone?
Booming voice. I heard you. Go ahead. Project.
Sure, I'll stand up here. My name is Moises. I'm with Local 881 of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. Do you see any? Thank you. Do you see any form of either collaboration, partnership with labor unions as we look at the jobs of the future? Certainly there are the trades, and we have a number of success stories of companies that are whose employees are union, and they are successful. I'd like to hear something about that. Is any form of collaboration?
Yeah, I think that sounds like a Juan Salgado and put him on the spot. He was telling me earlier that part of his problem at Instituto with placing new trainees into jobs is sometimes they get a lot of pushback from floor supervisors who kind of don't get language or are not very forgiving or cooperative with new hires. Which I think is a piece of that. Not that a union person, steward, would ever behave in such a way. But Juan, what do you think?
Well, I think that here I have a very nuanced view of all these issues, right? So it takes a little while, right? So do I think that partnerships with labor can and have been productive? Absolutely. Do I believe that every environment needs to be an organized environment? No, I don't. But I think what labor ought to do is think about its own history and get better at what it's gotten really good at. So if you look at this construction trades, it has gotten really good at apprenticeships, except if you dig deeper, it was also very good at excluding people from those trades, right? And so, I at that time, if you could bet more on getting into construction if you were a Mexican worker who just did not go through organized labor, got some experience, and then find your way to a union card, than you could going through organized labor, right? So I think what organized labor ought to do is focus on itself, figure out where it's had success, build on models from that, right? And make sure it works on all of the things that didn't work in the past, right? So that those don't become problems in the future. From a community support standpoint, or from just a delivery standpoint.
Thank you. Last one. We're going to go halfway down here. We got the red shirt. We got our hand up.
Good morning. My name is Abraham Lacey. I'm with the Far South Community Development Corporation. We're out in Roseland, West Pullman area. Just had a question. It was stated about on a national and global level. Is there a sense of corporate responsibility when it comes to major corporations like Nabisco or Ford who ship their jobs overseas? Is there a sense of corporate responsibility in, eventually they're going over there for cheap labor, or they want to go to a place that's deregulated so they don't have to adhere to these labor laws that we have here so strongly? Is there a sense of responsibility into that, or at least a patriotic responsibility to here?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. It's a great one to end on because we can put Juan in the middle again between the Scylla and Charybdis. Sometimes I've columnized on this subject. Is it just maximize shareholder value? Are we just really down to one commandment in today's business world? But I have a feeling that James Heckman maybe will indeed have today's last word from our panel.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to have the last word. I think we can hear some other good views as well. But I will say this. This goes back to the minimum wage discussion, but it's also relevant to this discussion. When we think about well-being, and we think about even measures of poverty, I think we have to be really very much more broad and inclusive. Part of well-being consists not only of exactly the wage paid at the job, but also consists of the price paid for the goods that people are consuming. And I'll tell you why that's really relevant. There was an article written by Sandy Jinks. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a famous... Christopher Jinks, exactly. Christopher Jinks, sometimes called Sandy, wrote a paper, and he was looking at the success of the war on poverty by Lyndon Johnson. It was the 50th anniversary, 1964 to 2014. Wrote a very interesting paper. The official poverty rate in the United States is 15%. That's what the official rate is. That's been the figure that's been stated in many, by using the measures that have been used for the last 50 years. But, he said, if you properly include improvements in the standard of living, what's sometimes called the Walmart effect. So Walmart is sometimes viewed as being kind of a demon here. But actually, in terms of the prices of goods, especially the goods that are bought more by poor people, and when you think about what payments in kind are that frequently aren't counted in the benefit, the actual poverty rate in the United States is about 4 to 5%. So there was a dramatic success, and so there is a little bit of a disconnect in the public statistics, thinking, well, people are much worse off. Well, they are in the paycheck sense, yes. But if you look at the well-being sense, our statistics don't take this into account. Now, why do I mention that in response to his question? It looks like it's extraneous. Part of what people are buying is cars. They're buying things like cars. So the question is a cheap car necessarily meaning the end of a job for somebody in Detroit? Well, it may, no question. But it can also mean an enhanced budget for individuals across the board. And maybe if it's a cheap car and maybe it's bought more often by people substituting it at a certain margin, they benefit as well. So I would look for inclusive measures of well-being. And I would look at the standard of living more broadly defined, not just the wage paid. And I think we get somewhat different social statistics. So that's not denying poverty. The 19,000 is real, and I understand it. But I think we should try to be a little broader and think, so this company, is it irresponsible for a company to produce goods cheaply? I don't think so, especially if it can create jobs. Because don't forget, even if Ford does locate off Mexico, then it might sell more cars and have more jobs at dealerships and actually have parts that might go to Mexico or some actually supplementation. So it really is a sense, do we want a bigger pie or do we want to cut the pie? And I think probably a bigger pie is very helpful, but it should be distributed more evenly. I completely agree.
I like ending on an upbeat note. Today's Urban Forum is just getting started. We are going to take a 10, 12-minute break, but first, before you go hit the coffee, please say a thank you to Jim Heckman, Juan Salgado, and Teresa Mintle. I think they're pretty correct.
Okay, great.